Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ProMed's webinar on the psychological impact of major incidents. It's just before 7 o'clock, so we're just going to leave the last few people in the waiting room a chance to get themselves in, get themselves settled, and then we'll begin. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to ProMed's webinar, The Psychological Impact of Major Incidents. My name is Matt Dinnery. I'm the Managing Director of ProMed. I'm also a qualified teacher with my PGCE. I've done my MIMS training and some Smart DNet CPD. Clinically, I'm a FREC 4. I also have a degree in biomedical sciences. I've been working in events, safety, security, and medical since 2006, producing all of the operational and safety plans from events from 50,000 all the way up to 280,000 guests. For those who don't know, our Zoom webinars are protected. There is a watermark on the video output. There is also a high-pitched audio watermark in the audio output. That's just to make sure that the only recordings that should be getting published are the ones that go onto our YouTube channel. So, our training courses, for those of you who don't know, we are partnered with a very reputable QualSafe centre who have a range of training courses available. You can book them directly through us on our website, www.promed999.co.uk/training. That'll give you the full details and the dates for all of our courses. Even if you're not studying with us, we do recommend you look on our website. We've broken down all of the assessment criteria for the QualSafe qualifications, give you a lot of information on the workbooks. We've signposted you to some CPD, gave you the references for all the books, some of which are available online if you prefer to read online. And we've also pointed you to some videos if you're doing your FREC 4 workbooks. So first of all, we have a FREC 3 course. The next one on the 24th of October is currently fully subscribed. It includes the level 3 in administering medical gases, which is for your Entonox. We do those courses currently for £390. The next one with spaces we believe to be in early February. If you've already got your FREC 3 and you want to do your FREC 4, we offer that course at £475. The next course with spaces begins on the 28th of November. It runs over 3 weekends, but there is some spacing of those weekends to allow you plenty of time to complete your 3 workbooks. And we do have STC Training Solutions video webinars available on our website, which goes through those workbooks in a lot more detail. If you hold your FREC 4 or you're a healthcare professional and otherwise need to keep your immediate life support qualification up to date, those courses are £150. It's a 1-day course, including a copy of the RC UK's immediate life support booklet. Next course is on the 15th of November. And lastly, if you've got your FREC 4 and you're working for a CQC registered organisation, we do the level 3 safe administration of life-saving medication course for £200. Next course runs on Saturday the 21st and Sunday the 22nd of November. You'll get to keep a JR Calc pocket book after the course, and you have access to all of the books you need during the course to get your workbook completed overnight. All of our courses at the moment run near Aylesbury, but we can run them anywhere in the UK if there is 4 or more of you. If you let us know, If there's a group of you and you've got a suitable venue, we can bring our trainers and our equipment out to you. Next thing to let you know about is we are currently having a little bit of a recruitment drive. We are seeing a massive upturn in the amount of work that is being inquired about across the UK. We do have a number of staff that are out on engagement in Hertfordshire, London and Manchester at the moment. And we do frequently get phone calls for the next day or 2-3 days ahead. Therefore, we are looking for more staff to be available. We do have kits, including defibs and gases, that we can loan you if you haven't got your own. So don't worry about that. We can make that happen. We are a living wage employer, so that means outside of London, the minimum you'll get paid from us is £11.75 per hour. And if you are inside London, if our jobs are inside London, then we pay £13.50 per hour. I've just been told that my microphone's a little bit low. We are currently at full volume at our end, but my microphone kind of green wiggle is around about the same level as every other week. So please turn your volumes up if there's a slight issue. I can see a couple of people saying it's okay, so let's just continue. If you are struggling to hear, you can always watch it back on YouTube. I will raise my voice a little bit more in the hope that it helps people. Going to continue then. So we are also a signatory to the prompt payment code, which means we're now obliged to pay all of our suppliers, which does include our subcontracted staff, within 30 days. Currently averaging at 22 days to pay people. So we do pay you promptly. So if you are a FREC 3 or higher, we will take you on as a first responder. If you're a FREC 4 or higher, we will take you on as an emergency medical technician and let you work to those grades. Obviously, there is the option to work at a lower grade if you have a higher qualification. And we are upfront. We do tell you what the job is, where it is, and what the rate of pay will be, and then you can decide if you want. A lot of our work comes out by text message and on Facebook groups, so it's really easy. If you want it, you just need to be the first person to get in touch with us. If you are interested, you'd like an application form, it's really easy. Just email us apply@promed999.co.uk and we will send you an application form. If you don't have a DBS check, we can run the DBS for you, and you'll need to keep that on the update service because we do carry out regular checks on our staff. All your qualifications, of course, will need to be verifiable with your awarding body, and you will need to supply references. We are a reputable company. We do our checks correctly. We promise our clients a particular level of service, and therefore we ensure that you provide that. As you know, we have a code of conduct in place for all our webinars and our face-to-face training events, and that is we have a space free from bullying, intimidation and harassment. We believe that everybody has the right to be treated with dignity, respect and courtesy and not be discriminated against. We encourage healthy debate, we encourage disagreement, we encourage people to learn from one another and have discussion. So as long as we're all respectful, polite about that, that is absolutely fantastic. So moving on to tonight. We're going to be looking at the psychological impact on major incidents, and we're going to consider how that applies to our zero responders, our first responders and other emergency services or healthcare personnel, the casualties and the uninjured survivors, the things that we need to consider for children and young people, the differences between hot and cold debriefs, what their roles are and how they impact on the sort of psychological trauma people experience. And then we're going to have a little brief whiz through what trauma risk management or TRIM is. We're not going to discuss any particular incidents in tonight's webinar, so there shouldn't be any triggers. But if at any point you feel like you need to leave or mute the audio, that's completely understandable. We know that this is a bit of a sensitive topic sometimes. And the only other thing I'm going to point out is I'm not a qualified mental health professional, so this is going to be at the very basic level, the kind of introductory level. I don't feel that I'm qualified to go into much depth. This is from an outsider's perspective rather than a mental health professional's perspective. So first of all, our zero responders. So if you can remember our early webinars, zero responders are those who happen to be at or near the scene of a major incident and do what they can to help. Now, zero responders can be your lay member of the public who's never done any first aid or trauma or major incident training in their life, but they could also be the highly qualified professional who just happens to be there, but without their usual range of equipment or personnel. So it could be that they're being exposed for things that they're possibly untrained for. Now, that in itself is it can induce a lot of stress. As professionals, we are trained, we have practice for things, we have been in these scenarios. So when we come across incidents, our minds kind of go into a bit of a procedural mode, and we just follow that procedure, and then we delay the sort of mental processing of that scenario until the scenario is over. A zero responder who's not necessarily had that training, not had that practice, that experience, they will feel the impact a lot more acutely and a lot more upfront than a professional would, because they don't have a default drill, they don't have a default set of procedures that they can sort of subconsciously follow. They're having to do everything quite consciously in their mind in real time. So aside from making them less effective than a professional, which we expect anyway, it also means that the second they stop doing something, they are really, really, really going to feel that. And the other thing with zero responders is they feel like they should have done more. And a lot of that is down to not having that professional backup immediately available, not having the full range of equipment, not having the first aid kit. So they especially those from a professional background who are doing their level best, because they haven't got a CAT, because they haven't got a trauma dressing, because they haven't got a nurse or an ODP standing by their side, they feel like they could have done more, especially if they've done treatment on somebody who proved to then be a fatality. They really will look at themselves, and a lot of the feelings tend to be around, if only I had, if I had my kit bag, if only there was a defib there, or if only there was a bag full of dressings, they might not have bled out. Those kind of emotions are really common in the trained but unequipped sort of bystander or zero responder. And from an organizational level, one of the issues with zero responders is that they're very hard to account for and very, very difficult to then follow up. So if we do want to go down the hot debrief and then the cold debrief and the trim model, and we want to reach out and make sure that the mental health services are available to them, it tends to be quite difficult because we don't necessarily recognize that the person who we've labeled as a survivor may have also been a zero responder. So we're not providing the level of service that we would provide to responders because we've not accounted for the fact that they've been a responder as well. So one of the key things that plans need to have in place is, what are they going to do with zero responders, and how are they going to account for them throughout the process, including ensuring that we have some follow-up contact details, because if they've been involved, they will have ongoing mental health needs. Now, everybody has ongoing mental health needs. Most of us on most days are what we would refer to as mentally healthy. Most of us on most days are what we would refer to as physically healthy as well. But depending on what has happened, there are days when we could be physically unhealthy, and similarly there are days that we can be mentally unhealthy. That's a normal part of life, but events such as this are very likely to mean that somebody becomes mentally unhealthy, and we need to make sure that they receive the appropriate treatment, just as if you were physically unhealthy, you would go and see your GP. But we just need to really think about in the planning, how are we going to capture that information, and who does it need to be provided to, and how are we going to ensure that that follow-up is carried out. So now we need to look at the first responders and emergency services personnel. So on the flip side, this is really easy. Organizations can very rapidly identify who was involved in a major incident, who did they send, who was first on scene, who was the commanders, who was deployed into the warm zone from heart, who was in the casualty clearing station, who was in the vehicles that was going to and from the hospital. It's really easy for a service, an emergency organisation, to collate that list of people. If it happens at an event medical provider just needs to know who was working that day. So it's not that difficult to do that. But the stresses are similar but different to zero responders. So quite often, the early resources have a feeling of being overwhelmed or overloaded because they have arrived there potentially on their own or maybe with a small number of resources, and yet everything still has to be done. So the feelings that tend to come out of this are that they feel they didn't do enough or they could have done more, because there is so much to do and they don't necessarily even know where to start. So that can go one of two ways or three ways. It can lead to freezing and doing nothing, because you just don't know where to start. It can lead to trying to do everything at once because you know everything needs to be done, so let's try and do it all. Or it can lead to a triaging of the workload and actually prioritizing and allocating those command roles if that person has been trained and does regular CPD and is drilled and it's a semi-automatic process. Even with that in place, if you're one of 4 or 5 people there, you ain't got all your command roles filled. You're still going to feel overwhelmed. There's going to be a lot of information overload. And it's really important that training emphasizes that by following CSCAT, by getting that command structure in place, getting safety assured, and then communicating, then you are doing the most for the most. And it is only through repeating that and making sure that that message is consistent in everybody's training that we can reduce the sort of negative feelings associated with being there early. The other issue we have in terms of the overwhelming and overloading is then staff rostering, because everybody wants to get involved, everybody wants to attend the incident and do what they can, everybody wants to be a part of it almost. But if we bring in everybody too early, then those who may need a longer rest period because they've worked longer hours, it becomes difficult to then have a sustainable work-life balance if everybody's doing overtime. So it needs to be very careful deployment to ensure that those who were there first can leave first and potentially have an extra day off to just process things or sleep more or go to the pub and have a pint, whatever that person needs to do. They just need that space to do that, and the organisation needs to make sure that they've not used up all of the on-call or the standby resource, because actually that's going to be needed the following day and the following night just as much. People do tend to remember the control room staff, but there's also cases where it's forgotten about. And being the first person to answer the phone to a major incident can be quite an ordeal. Obviously, control room staff have been through arrests, they've been through births, and they don't always get to know the outcome of what's happening. But in a major incident, they do get to see the outcome, and that outcome can be a lot worse than their mental model. So they've got a mental model and they're seeing the resources helping everybody. They're seeing lots of resources getting there. But then all of a sudden, BBC News turn up, Sky News turn up, and those feeds come on in the control room, and all they're seeing is this devastation, and that's conflicting with their mental model. And whenever you have a conflict between the reality in front of you and your mental model, your understanding of what was happening, your brain tries to reconcile the differences, and it's difficult as a human to adjust your mental model, because you almost have to unlearn something to relearn it and alter the connections in your schema, and that's a really difficult process. So you tend to have an unconscious bias towards your own thing. However, if something is extremely traumatic, it will just undo all of those connections quite rapidly. But because you're then not left with the positives you had, you're only then seeing the negatives, and that can lead to a bit of a downward spiral, because your unconscious bias has now got a negative situation, and therefore your brain is looking for more negatives to reinforce the negative mental model that it's now got going on. So one of the things that I learned as a teacher is about trying to make sure that the information at the beginning is the right information, doesn't contain misconceptions. Now, in the control room, that can be very difficult, but it's really key that information is shared so that you're not just working on your 1 or 2 phone calls, but you're actually getting information from everybody in the room. So the control room supervisor, the control room managers should be regularly updating everybody else in the control room, going, this is what we know so far, this is what we've heard from the scene, etc., etc. And that should be done regularly, every 10 to 15 minutes. And this is something that wasn't expressly stated in Grenfell Phase 1, but it was, if you read between the lines, when you're looking at the conversations that were going on in the control room, it's very clear that the mental model of different controllers was disparate from one another. And even if we were to take a shared mental model of everybody sat in LFB's control room, that shared mental model was hugely different from the scene that was unfolding. That then led to further communication issues. But just looking at that from a psychological perspective, you're then going to be reflecting and thinking, well, why didn't I know that? Why did I not understand this was happening? And it can lead to a lot of feelings of guilt, or it could lead to a feeling of disassociation, because actually you don't feel you were part of that incident that's on the news, because that's not the incident you had in your head. And that then makes you feel disconnected from your colleagues. And if you're feeling disconnected from your colleagues, then your support network, the people you would normally turn to talk about these traumatic events and experiences, you feel disconnected and disengaged from. So you're not as open, and you're not as having those conversations that would actually help you become healthy again. And of course, those who weren't involved can have feelings. So as an emergency services organisation, or even at a large event, you're going to have staff who you need to do the business as usual. So if you've got a large event with 50,000 people, and you've got a major incident take place that's affected maybe 5,000 people, you've still got 45,000 people to look after who are still going to be drunk, who are still going to fall over, who are still going to pass out because of whatever. So you can't put all of your resources into that incident. But those on the business as usual can sometimes feel that they weren't able to help. They feel helpless. They feel lost. They perhaps feel devalued. You know, why did you not use me? Was there something wrong? You know, did I do something wrong? And they might not feel supported by their organization. You know, why did you not send me? Did you not think I could cope? And that can, if they're already having some underlying issues, if they're already quite anxious about themselves, if they're already self-critical, if they have low self-esteem, that non-direct involvement can worsen those feelings. And it's often forgotten to include in the messaging about the major incidents, whether that's public or whether that's internal, about the large number of people who continued doing their day-to-day job, who continued responding to the nan downs, who continued to staff the gate, who continued to stay in the satellite first aid post, dealing with people who came in with the cut fingers. Because actually, if we didn't have that function, we wouldn't have as many resources available to the major incident, because they will be getting dragged out to go and deal with the minor issues elsewhere. And it's really important that in our messaging, we acknowledge and thank them for their service and make them feel part of that overall integral team. Your role at that major incident was to deal with everything else so that those at the major incident weren't getting distracted or pulled from their deployment in order to do that. It's just making sure that they are thanked and respected and valued just as much as those who happened to be deployed, because there is a bit of choosiness in terms of perhaps qualification for command or location when the calls come in, but nobody's choosing John over Joe because they like John as a mate. And people sometimes feel like that if it's not made clear what the decision-making processes were and that their role was equally important. For those who do longer-term care, they interact regularly with the most injured, the sickest, the most traumatized, and that can have a different impact again. So thinking your emergency service personnel, your police family liaison officers who go out and check on people, the victim support team who go out time after time, within healthcare to the intensive care staff or the orthopedic staff, the occupational therapists who are working with the survivors, the victims, the casualties, whatever we want to call them, for a much longer period of time. They kind of have a different set of emotions to deal with, because this isn't just that one incident that took place. This is something that, this person has lost whatever, and you're seeing that week in, week out. And you need an outlet for yourself if that's what you're doing. So let's look at the casualties themselves. And the first thing to point out quite clearly is care of casualties is way more than just physical injuries. So as first aiders and first responders ourselves, the first thing we always think about, what are the 3 P's of first aid? Preserve life, prevent deterioration, promote recovery. So preserving life, everybody knows you keep them alive. Preventing deterioration, people get caught up on the physical. People get caught up patching wounds, not letting fractures get worse. But actually, we're also needing to prevent the deterioration of people's mental health. We don't want our casualties to see more than they need to. So if there are other things happening around where a casualty is trapped, we should be doing our best to screen off those other things so that the casualty can just focus on themselves and not see things that they're not trained or prepared to see. And then promoting recovery is, again, we're not just promoting the recovery of one's physical health, we're promoting the recovery of their mental health. And that starts right at that first aid level. So myself and my leadership team, we're booked onto a supervising mental health for first aid course at the end of this month, because we feel it is really important to have on our regular teams that are deployed mental health first aiders, because we need people who can be there on the ground when things are happening and making sure that we are promoting the recovery of one's mental health if they've been injured, if they've had an accident, if they've been involved in a major incident. That needs to be in place from the word go. We're not experts. We're not going to treat any conditions they have, but we are just going to start there and listen to them. We're going to start and make sure those signposts are ready. Make sure that the casualty knows that it's okay to not be okay after this event. And if you're not okay, here's some ways that you can talk to people and make sure those are available. Casualties are witnesses to a traumatic event. So look at how the police, treat their witnesses. Look at what victim support does. And that model is not inappropriate for a major incident. Having that support, having that informal network from victim support is a good network to have for major incidents as well, because these people have seen things that they weren't expecting to see, and they've seen things that is going to kind of follow them for a little bit. In addition to that, they've got their own injuries, so they're going to be recovering from potentially life-changing injuries. So major incidents tend to come with severe injuries for casualties, and that could be any number of things. It could be loss of limbs, it could be loss of limb function, it could be serious abdominal or thoracic wounds, it could cause significant pain for a long period of time, it could be fractures, and that's obviously the more serious ones. And that recovery process is something that quite often does come with appropriate levels of mental health support. But off the back of what they've also seen and done at major incident, there's more considerations that need to go on. So they might also know people who survived uninjured, and that can be associated with those feelings of, well, why me? Why was I chosen? It may feel more personal. And the flip side of that is they may know people who didn't survive. Why them? Why them? Why not me? And a lot of the casualties thoughts tend to be very personalized around the issue of choice. It's almost like somebody chose for them specifically. And obviously, in a random attack, that's not necessarily the case. There's very few major incidents take place where there is a specific casualty as a target. But that doesn't alter how people are going to feel, because as human beings, we naturally compare ourselves to other human beings. It's something that happens in the animal kingdom all across the world. You compare yourself to somebody or something else, and that, what is normally a healthy process, competition is what allows us to evolve, allows us to improve. So that's a normally healthy process, but in this particular scenario, it becomes an unhealthy process, and it's distinguishing what is making it unhealthy from a healthy process, and working with that is where that support needs to be targeted. You've then got your uninjured survivors, and we all have heard about survivor's guilt, for example. So why was I not injured? How come I was there? Why was I so close but I didn't get hurt? It's a very common feeling that's reported by our uninjured survivors. There's also a feeling of helplessness. They might have wanted to help, why was I there, but I couldn't do anything. I didn't know what to do. I've never been trained for this. I saw all these people around me hurt, but I couldn't help them. The people who were there, who saw other people who were there helping, but they didn't know what to do. At the end of the day, not everybody is first aid trained. It would be nice if everybody was, but not everybody is, and it's not everybody's line of work. And if everybody was a first aider, then there wouldn't actually be any need for any first aiders, because nobody would actually be doing anything. And it's kind of, for that, again, one of the big things is making sure that we have a good patient tracking system in place that accounts for the survivors, and that data captured is then passed on to outreach services. Because sometimes people, I say sometimes, no, quite a lot of the time, if we're going to be honest, quite a lot of the time, people don't want to ask for help. And there is, unfortunately, still a stigma around mental illness or being mentally unhealthy. People don't often want to seek help. And you'll notice quite a lot of tonight, I've used the term mentally unhealthy, because we can be physically unhealthy. Nobody is embarrassed about going to the doctor if they've got a bad case of the flu. Not as far as I'm aware, anyway. Nobody is embarrassed about going to the hospital if they fell off their bike and have got pain in their thumb. They're unhealthy, clearly. But yet somebody is feeling helpless because they didn't do something after witnessing a traumatic event. They're mentally unhealthy, but they feel embarrassed about asking for help with that. And that's something that we need to change as a society. And the 21 of you who are here tonight clearly want to do something about that. ProMed, made it clear on Saturday gone, on World Mental Health Day, that we are here to listen. We are keen to ensure our staff are trained in mental health. You know, occasionally we kind of remind people on our social media platforms that it's okay to not be okay. And the more of us that continue to promote these messages, that it's okay to talk, that it's okay to not be okay, the more of us who are open about our own past moments of mental unhealthiness or current moments of mental unhealthiness, the more those who need to seek the help will feel comfortable and confident in asking for help. Because I think most of us at some point in our lives will experience some mental issues, whether that is a one-day issue or something that lasts a decade or longer. You know, 25% of people will suffer a mental illness, or sorry, will be diagnosed with a mental illness at some point in their life. But I would say 100% of us will experience being mentally unwell for a short period of time, just the same as we are going to physically be unwell at some period of time. So it's just normalizing that language and normalizing that, yeah, this is going to happen at some point or more than one point in everybody's life. It's normal. And I think that is one of the best ways to help those uninjured survivors, is to be normal, normalizing what has happened, normalizing the talking about it. So let's be careful now and think about children and young people. So one really important thing is that children, adolescents, teenagers, all have developmental needs that differ to adults. They are not small human beings. Children have very different physiological and psychological needs to fully grown adults. So because of that, it's really important that when we're preparing major incident plans, when we are considering running training scenarios and practicing for these occurrences, that we include children and young people, whether they are toddlers, whether they are teenagers, or somewhere in between. They need to be factored in, because if your event would normally have children and young people, if your venue would normally have children and young people, then your major incident will, and I hate to use the term here, but normally have children and young people affected. Major incidents are not exclusive to adults. So quite often, children and young people will have anxiety. It's probably one of the more common symptoms of mental unwellness in a child or young person, is that anxiety. It's one of the first kind of emotions they'll learn to express after their kind of basic needs. So, you know, once they've learned how to express their need for food, drink, excretion, and affection, the next kind of expression you tend to find from a child or young person is anxiety. It's that grasping. It's, you know, they don't let go of their caregiver because they're anxious about what's out there. So it's a default setting for a child or a young person is to go back to being anxious and having and displaying that anxiety. And if you can't find the factor for it, then we need to consider those unseen factors. Children and young people stress easily, and it's well known that adolescents and pubescents, teenagers basically, are probably those who are finding managing stress to be very difficult, which in turn kind of leads to the stress cycle. So they have the stressor, and then they are struggling to manage that stressor, which then means the lack of management of the stress is a new stressor, which then leads to more stress, which means they are finding it more difficult to manage. And this cycle just continues and continues until there is some kind of intervention. Now, that intervention might be they read a book and it gives them a new idea. It might be that they go to sleep that night and wake up in the morning and couldn't care less about the day before. It might be that their parents give them a strategy, or a professional gives them a strategy, or their teacher stops them and tells them to do something a bit different, and it then helps everything make sense. Whatever it is, until that cycle is broken, that stress leads to more stress in adolescents and teenagers. So witnessing a traumatic event, being part of a traumatic event, is clearly a stressor. And if that person has already got stressors and they're struggling to manage those stressors, this new stressor will guaranteeably start that kind of vicious cycle. And it's really important that we get those early interventions. Now, that could be us being there first and going, right, it's okay. I know you're worried about your mum. Right, it's okay. I know you're worried about your leg. Right, it's okay. I know you're worried about. And then going, but what we're going to do is we're going to fix that. So yes, you're still going to worry about it, but we're here to fix that. So you leave that part to us. What I want you to do is focus on this. Give them something to do. Break that stress cycle as early as possible, because then it means by the time they get to hospital, they're not as wound up as they could have been. So when they get to hospital and there are more professionals available in that hospital, they can then start to work on the really important issues rather than having to work on breaking a stress cycle down. So just those really early kind of, okay, we're here, we're going to deal with that. Right, okay, you know, you've seen something horrible. Do you want to talk about that? No, okay, that's fine. You don't have to. Or yeah, okay, well, that's fine. We're here to listen. I can treat your leg. I can treat your arm. We can have a chat about that. If they go into Survivor Reception Centre, you know, I'm really busy, but could you help me out by making a cup of tea? All of a sudden, they're focused on making a cup of tea, and their new stress is making sure everybody has a cup of tea, and they're not overthinking things, and just stopping them overthinking things reduces stress. And I suppose to an extent that works for adults as well. I'm sure we all know that our young people are addicted to social media and devices, and quite often social media, whether intentionally or not, is a trigger for young people. They may read about something and they may feel triggered. So you'll see a lot of sort of more aware people, or people who've been through things, might start a post with TW or trigger warning. It's just kind of saying to those who know they get triggered, you might want to skip this, you know, don't read this because it might upset you. And that's a kind of, you know, really nice proactive thing to do, you know, because people who know they're triggered and who know what their triggers are deliberately avoid it, to be fair, because they don't want to feel in a negative way. So other things that kind of, you know, affect children more so than adults is, you know, they may have more nightmares because, you know, they've got a highly developing brain. There's lots of neuron connections being made, and, you know, their dreams, you know, we as adults dream about boring things or winning the lottery. Children have so many fantasies and so many, you know, imaginary friends and, you know, made up worlds, and they have so many different visions that their brains are just so much work, so much creativity is going on in a child's mind that, you know, quite often their negative thoughts will come out as nightmares. Memories of the event and pictures of the event can unexpectedly pop in their mind, and again, that's just a case of there's so much creativity and vision going on in their mind. There's so much activity going on with their neurons in their brain that sometimes it makes a connection to this traumatic event, and they don't know how to switch that off. Because of that, because of the strength of the connections and how active their brains are, they may feel as if it's actually happening again, because there's nobody telling them what their current reality is. There's nobody kind of forcing those connections to stop, and they've not yet acquired I don't want to say skills, but they've not yet acquired the innate ability to recognize and stop that from happening. Whereas we as adults, we know we're thinking about something we don't want to think about. Some of us might not be able to stop it, but a lot of us can go, yeah, glad that's over. Oh, glad I'm not having to go through that again. And we kind of compartmentalize it. Children find that compartmentalization a lot more difficult than adults do. Because they can't necessarily talk about it. So the language skills we have as adults are what we've developed over 20, 30, 40, 50, even more years. The language skills a child has are less developed. You know, you learn your vocabulary through your reading, you learn your language through your speaking. And children don't necessarily have, well, no, they don't have the experience that we as adults have. So because they can't verbally or perhaps write, they can't use words to express what is going on for them in their head. They might draw about it if they have the motor skills to be able to draw, or they might play in a way that's demonstrating their feelings or demonstrating what took place. And it's important that we recognize that actually what they're doing is no different to two adults going down the pub, having a beer and having a chat about something really traumatic. A child doesn't have the verbally expressive capabilities to do that. So that expression still manifests itself, just in a different way. It may also be like adults, they don't want to think about or don't want to talk about the event. They might try and shut it down. You know, we have what we call adverse childhood experiences, and quite often that leads to large parts of their brain being shut off. If something was such a negative experience, they'll try and shut that off. But because there's so much connections and such strength in the connections in their brain, that can actually lead to other things being shut off as well. They could avoid anything that might remind them of the event. So again, just thinking about how powerful a child's brain is and how imaginative a child's brain is, if they are coming across something that is associated with that event, those connections are really strong. And because that memory, that thought process is so horrifying or so negative for them, they might actively seek to avoid things that they know are going to cause that, because why would you want to do anything that's going to cause you pain? But you know, you wouldn't go and do something that's going to physically cause you pain. So why would you go and do something that's going to mentally cause you pain? It's that sort of model there. In terms of the symptoms to look out for, you know, getting angry and upset more easily, not being able to concentrate, not being able to sleep, being quite jumpy or looking out for danger, showing more anxiety, so becoming clingy with parents and caregivers, older siblings. In schools, you know, we're taught on attachment disorders, because quite often we can have children, young people who've had adverse childhood experiences can become attached to their teachers or their teaching assistants. And that can also manifest itself physically. They may have physical complaints. They may temporarily lose their abilities, like feeding and toileting if they're a younger child, or it may be that there are behavioural problems at school. So, you know, it's really important that, you know, for a child who spends a lot of their time with different caregivers, you know, parents, grandparents, childminders, after school clubs, school, that they're all communicating and saying, you know, look, they got caught up in this, you know, be aware of it. So hopefully by now, certainly in light of the Manchester attack in 2017, it should not by now be protocol that whenever there is an incident involving young people, that CAMS, or Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, are immediately available in the receiving hospitals for that incident, because the sooner they can start to build up that relationship, that rapport with the young people, the more likely they are to have successful outcomes. And it's important not to forget as well that children and young people will have family support, but that also means that that family needs to be supported, because unless their mum or their auntie happens to be a child and adolescent mental health services worker, they're not then going to be able to know how to deal with their own emotions very well. So they're doing everything they can. They want to help their child, absolutely. Of course, as a parent, you want to help your child in the best way you know how, even if that's a detriment to yourself. So it's important not just to look at the child, and you know, my peds nurse colleagues and friends will tell me, you know, about holistic nursing. You know, you don't just look at the child in isolation, you look at their siblings, you look at their caregivers, and you make sure that whatever you're doing is with all of that in mind. and you take into account their needs as well as the sick child's, because the emotional drain on a family is quite significant. So now I've looked at all the groups of people. Let's take a little look at our kind of different types of debriefs. So a hot debrief, if you've not came across the term, is at the scene. It's before going home. So this is, as a commander, before you're kind of, saying goodbye to everybody, what you need to be doing is gathering people together and going, right, okay, anything anyone wants to talk about? How was it? Good, bad, indifferent? Things we need to do better next time? Things that didn't go well? Things that we did right? What are we going to continue doing? Just ask those questions to spur that conversation, because you'll get an outpour. Try and keep track of it if you can. That's difficult. Of course, it's difficult. Unless you've got 3 or 4 logists with one commander, you're just not going to keep up with the amount of stuff that's being talked about. But what that's going to do is that is going to give you a really quick read on, right, who's processing this logically? Who is processing this emotionally? Who has not processed this? And you can divide your staff then into 3 groups. Those who aren't processing it need to be followed up quite quickly. Those who are processing it emotionally probably need some support. Those who are processing it logically will probably need a follow-up a day or so later, because it will then become emotional in a lot of cases. So it's just giving you the opportunity to have that read, group your staff together and think, okay, what type of support do I need to offer these people? When do they need that support? Who am I going to tell about this, and where am I going to get that support from? It gives you that opportunity to do that. How do we unwind at the end of a shift? How do we unwind? Do we go to the crew room? Do we get ourselves a takeaway? Sometimes the nicest thing to do is get everybody back to base and order a takeaway in, or go to the supermarket and buy a load of fresh fruit, and just say to people, there's no rush to go home. Here's some free food, here's some drink, sort yourself out. Because actually, thinking about your personal needs, if you've just done 10 to 12 hours at a major incident, are you going to want to go home and cook a meal before you go to bed? No, you're probably not. Have you eaten in the 10 to 12 hours you're at a major incident? No, you probably haven't. Is it healthy to go 24 hours without eating? No, it certainly isn't. So thinking about those welfare considerations and making sure they're factored into your hot debrief. Don't let people go home if you think that their welfare isn't going to be in tip-top condition. Deal with those welfare problems, then let them go home. Even if people are going, no, I just want to go home. No, I just want to go home. No, look, come with me. We're going to sit down, go and have a cup of tea. Right, look at all this food. And actually, once it's in front of them, people will go, oh, you know what? Yes, I need this 5 minutes. Yes. But when you're still caught up in adrenaline, you don't always see that. Your call debriefs then happen after and away from the incident. So this is everybody's opportunity. Now, you can do these electronically. You can send a little survey around. You can send an email around. You can send some paper forms around. You can have people come into the office for a chat. You can have a group chat. You can have one-to-one chats. Again, it very much depends on the incident, your organisation, how you want to do it. What's really important is you follow up. Whether you follow up a day later, 3 days later, a week later, depends on the circumstances and the individuals. But you need to be following up. You need to be giving people an opportunity to come in and talk about the incident. You need to be giving people a chance to get things off their chest. And you need to not take things at face value. You need to kind of watch out for things. You need to have in the back of your mind, this may have affected that person. You also need to think this may not have affected that person. And if it has affected them, they need to know what's on offer. And you need to take the opportunity during your call debrief, where we're doing that lessons learned, to say, not saying you have to, but just so you know, it's free service available, in your employee assistance program. If you want anything, here's a card, give them a call, just in case you lost a card when we rolled out the program 5 years ago. Here's another one. Not saying you have to, but it's there. We don't know whether you've used it or not. Crack on. Some people will, some people won't. It's just giving them that reminder that is there, and it's perfectly normal. I've used EAPs in the past, and I've said to people, take this card. I didn't think I'd use it, but actually, you know what? A few years ago I did, and I did have a 4 or 5 weeks worth of hourly phone calls, and I did feel a bit better, and that was fine. If you've not been through that, don't lie. But if you have been through it and you're comfortable sharing that, it might just give people that confidence, that normalization that they need. So the last thing we're going to cover is trauma risk management, or TRIM. So if you've worked in the NHS ambulance services, or if you've been in the military, you might well by now have heard of TRIM. So it's very clearly trauma focused. So therefore it's ideal for major incident. And what it is it's a peer support network. So this isn't bringing in external help, mental health professionals or counselors or psychologists or psychiatrists. This is, people who want to help their peers, have done some extra training, and are available to talk to, or will, check in on people who they know have been involved in something. So what needs to happen is there needs to be an interview within 72 hours following the event. That doesn't have to be a face-to-face interview. It could just be a phone call and chat. It could be by Zoom. But the whole point is you're looking for your risk factors. So there's a bit of scoring matrix. And what we're looking for is we're looking for kind of we're looking for any of the 10 things that would increase somebody's risk of needing support. So those 10 things are: if the person perceived they were out of control during the event. So if they didn't feel totally in control of what was happening or what they were doing, that's a risk factor. If they believe their own life was at risk during the incident, that's another risk factor. If they are blaming others, so I'm not saying blaming the perpetrator of the event, I'm saying blaming others around them, blaming their colleagues, blaming the command structure, blaming the organisation, blaming the casualties. So if they're blaming others for what's happened, that's a risk factor. If they're saying they feel guilty about their behaviour, so whether that was action or whether that was inaction, or if they feel ashamed or embarrassed about any actions or inactions, any aspect of their behaviour, that's another risk factor. If they've been observed to be acutely stressed following the event, that's a risk factor. If they admit to feeling stressed from the event, that's the same risk factor. If they've then been exposed to substantial stress since the event, so if they've had the incident and then the following day something else has happened, that's clearly a risk factor. If they have had problems with their day-to-day activities, so if they've not been able to go to work, if they've struggled to make themselves a decent meal, if they've not looked after their hygiene, anything that kind of indicates they're not doing, what we do normally day to day. What do we normally do day to day? We get out of bed, we use a toilet, we make ourselves breakfast, we get ourselves dressed, we'll have a shower maybe, make ourselves another meal, we'll get changed and we'll go to bed and we'll sleep nicely. Now, if we're struggling with any aspect of those things, that's another risk factor. If they've been involved in previous traumatic events, that's a risk factor. Trauma is cumulative. There's only so much space in our brain, so if we've already had 1 or 2 events, this third one might be the one that tips us over the edge. Whereas your first one, yes, it's a trauma, but actually your brain's got a lot of working capacity. It's still got a lot of things it can work through. If you're at your 9th or 10th, well, it's either going to be trauma fatigue and you don't care, or it's going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. The support network is a risk factor if it's poor support network. So, is this somebody who's really outgoing, who's got a good network of friends? Do they speak to their mum every week? Do they live with a bunch of nice people who they support themselves? Do they look after, are they the person who always looks after other people? Do they have that support network around them or not? If they do, great. But if they don't, then it's a risk factor. And then the one that always comes up, alcohol, drugs, has somebody been abusing substances or alcohol to cope with the distress caused from that event? So if, those factors are present, then, it needs a little bit of additional support from colleagues and line managers. So, people who've done the TRIM training, just checking in on them regularly, seeing if they're getting better or worse, being that listening ear, saying, if you want to talk, I'm here. If you don't want to talk, it's fine. You know, if you want me to come round and, you know, make yourself a bite to eat, you know, I'll come round and make a burger with you. You know, if you want to go out for a drink, I'll come out for a drink with you, not you know, half a dozen bottles. You know, I'm not saying it like that, but, you know, somebody who's actually drinking to cope with a recent stressor, if you go and say, right, I'll come out for a drink with you, and you have a pint, and then you set the example of going home and they go home, you might have stopped them from staying out all night. So just making sure that we're not saying it's wrong to do these things, but it, you know, reasonable, proportionate, and, you know, it is normal to go out for a drink if you're feeling stressed, but actually there's a line, there's a limit, and you know, it's fine, but I'm going home now because I've had my pint. Do you want to come home as well? You know, just kind of setting the boundaries and not letting a situation run away with itself. If you know, that continues and it works, then a month later you'll do another kind of interview again. You'll go through those same risk factors, and if there's ongoing needs, it's at this point that you're probably looking at your referrals to your acute mental health services, your counselling services, just to give people that extra support they need, because not everybody is going to get over it by having a chat. Not everybody's going to get over it at all, and you don't have to get over something neither. But ultimately, if you're still having issues, if you're still feeling mentally unwell a month later, well, if you're feeling physically unwell for a month and, you know, taking a couple of paracetamol every day didn't help you, it's probably about time to go and have a chat with your GP about that tummy ache that you've been taking 2 paracetamol for a month for. Likewise, if you're feeling a bit mentally unwell and you've been doing a little bit of chatting and talking to people and, you know, trying to make yourself feel better for a month and it's not working, then you probably need to go to your GP and have a chat about that, because, you know, you need somebody a little bit more professional experience to provide that little bit extra that you can't do for yourself. It's, you know, physical health and mental health shouldn't be seen as different things. So tonight's webinar, which is last stage of the hour, I'm getting so much better at timing these, has looked at the psychological impact of major incidents on our zero responders, our first responders, emergency services and healthcare personnel, the casualties, the uninjured survivors that were present, how children and young people need to be considered, what the purpose of hot and cold debriefs are in terms of psychological management, and we've had a brief look at the TRIM, or the Trauma Risk Management Tool. So I'm sure many of you are really keen to get your hands on a CPD certificate. So if you are, please just email us at webinars@promed999.co.uk with your full name. We're going to verify that you're in this session. So if you've used a different email address to log into Zoom or a different name on Zoom than you'd like on your certificate, please make sure you include those details so we can check the register. We're also going to check that you've left us a review somewhere, preferably within the last couple of days, not the one from 3 months ago. And then we'll email you a digital certificate within 3 business days. We are currently getting quite good at doing these within the next day or two. So in terms of the reviews, as you know, webinars being free of charge, you've all enjoyed this CPD session without paying a single penny. So we do ask that you leave us a review. We don't say give us 5-star review or anything like that. We would like an honest and accurate representative review of how you thought tonight's CPD session went. If you do give us, you know, the 5 stars, absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. If, however, we've not got the maximum possible rating from you, could you just give us a little bit of feedback, a little constructive criticism, something as to how we can make the CPD session even better for you? So we're on Trustpilot, we're on Yelp, we're on Google, and we're on Facebook. If you've left us a review on 1 or 2 of those before, please can you leave us a review on one of the different ones, just so the good word is getting spread across the internet. And now what we're going to do is we are going to have a little question and answer session. So Alexander and Hayden, you're both very welcome. Nathan, yep, absolutely right. Those who aren't present are as important as those who are. Yeah, so yeah, it is something that, you know, if you've been through it, it definitely is something that comes in there. So question and answer session. So if there's any questions you want, please feel free to ask them in the chat by text, or if you'd like to raise your hand on using the feature in Zoom, we can ask you to unmute yourself and we can have a two-way conversation. And, you know, let's get some dialogue going. It's really good to talk about these things. And I like hearing other people's voices, not just my own. So any questions at all from anybody? I don't like assignment rooms. Anybody want to talk? Anybody got any questions? None from Nathan. Okay, that's good. At least somebody's talking. I know there was a lot to take in and a lot to think about. So if you don't have any questions, you are free to leave. If you do have any questions, let's please ask them now. Otherwise, I just look awkward sat here. Georgie, you're very welcome. Neil, very welcome as well. Jenny, yep, brain overflowing. I can completely understand that. There was a lot of content in here, and I'm sure many of you recognize this is not something that there is a great deal of resource, certainly not video or spoken resource on. So I'm not surprised that, you know, people's brains are a little bit, whoa, out there tonight. Amira and Dee, very welcome. Nathan, yes, I do recognize quite a few of the faces tonight as well. So in the absence of any questions, let's take a look at our webinar program for the next few weeks. So coming up next week, we are going to be looking at emergency services command roles at incidents. That's not just going to be the medical flavour, that's going to be the full emergency services flavour. Following week, the 29th of October, we're going to be looking at working on TV and film production sets, mainly targeted at medics. But we are going to kind of be discussing a few of the different roles and the different departments. So if you're just generally interested in TV and film, come along to that. At the moment, it's scheduled for bonfire night. However, if we get busy, if restrictions are lifted in that short space of time, unlikely, but if we are busy, we will postpone this one. But at the moment, bonfire night is going to be the safety considerations for medical providers at events and incidents. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of health and safety there, looking at what we need to do to make sure that staff are kept healthy and safe. 12th of November will be safety critical communications and protocols. So following on off the back of the radio communications seminar last week, we're now going to look at safety critical communications, whether that's face-to-face, whether that is on a radio, whether that is on a telephone, safety critical communications, just making sure that people know how to check their messages are understood, how they're going to be acted on, how to clarify things, all of those kind of different aspects of communicating with one another. And that's as far as we've got in terms of the titles. I'm sure there are a few others that people have wanted. So if you do want any webinars, do just email our team, webinars@promed999.co.uk. Our training team will collate them into some nice workable titles and they'll let me know. And then I will start doing my research and pulling the content together. And then we'll present them. Our webinar series does run on Thursdays at 7 o'clock. I am unsurprisingly planning on taking the 24th and 31st of December off. But otherwise, right up until the 17th of December, we will be running these every week. And it's also just to let you know that if you are interested in the clinical side of things, our training partners, STC Training Solutions, run a weekly webinar series on a Monday at 7 p.m. They've recently just covered safe administration, life-saving medications. The link to that is available on our website and YouTube channel. So please check that out. They've also covered most of the FREC for CPD and workbooks now. And I can't remember what they're running on Monday, but their sessions are always well attended, always really good as well, and they're free. So if you do want to do some clinical CPD, check out our website and our events, and they will link you to those. So as we've had no questions come in, just a reminder, it's webinars at promed999.co.uk with your full name to grab a CPD certificate. Make sure you've got your name and email address from Zoom included somewhere in that so we can verify that you've been in this session. Make sure you leave us a review and we'll get your certificates to you in 3 business days. Reviews, please, on Trustpilot, Yale, Google, and Facebook. You may well find that you're going to get an email from 1 or 2 of those services in the next few days. Ignore it if you've already left us a review, but if not, please take advantage of the fact we've sent you a link so that all you need to do is type and press submit. So thank you very much for attending. I'm going to leave the chat open until 8:15, at which point we will kick you all out of the room. Otherwise, you're completely free to leave now. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening. See you on Monday at 7 p.m. if you're coming to STC with us, or I will see you Thursday at 7. Bye-bye.